Hello and welcome to this week's Pillar Guidance. I am Tavish Cardiff, representing our raw material for Food Week, where we talk about how we are nurtured. This session, I am getting a little more personal and talking from my own perspective rather than giving the objective view of the pillar. And Food Week is one where I have a lot of matter. I personally have been formed by so many of the people around me and the artists and the lyrics and the songs. And when I was a kid, I think many of you know that my parents owned a record store and I spent a lot of time there. I spent a lot of time listening to music. We didn't actually have a television. So as a child, my mind was very blurry between reality and fiction in terms of like what a song said and maybe what a book said, or fiction versus nonfiction, or what was real and what wasn't real. I lived in a very fantasy type space. And so when it came to nurturing and food, as a young child, we struggled to have all of the things that the people around us did. But as a kid, I didn't know that. Looking back, I could see where my parents, my dad especially, was strapped and doing the best that he could to give us food that was nutritious and healthy, but also being just fully in his own world, in his own life, and flying by the seat of his pants. My dad used to say that we all grew up together, and in a lot of ways that's true. He became a fantastic cook, and at some point in my life, he wasn't. No one was cooking. We spent a large period of time, probably close to a year, eating McDonald's or pizza, and then every morning headed to the donut store where we would get a donut and a little carton of milk, and that was breakfast. I don't think we were doing that much better at our school lunch either. A lot of carbs and a lot of filler food. But again, let's go back to the part where I didn't really understand that those lacks were happening in my life. From the nurturing standpoint, I had lack in a lot of areas, and it was hard to pinpoint where they were exactly because I was so competent and seemingly confident, even though I think even the people closest to me and around me couldn't see the struggle that I was really experiencing. And I wasn't willing to say it, so I think it sat where it did for a long time with me just figuring out how to navigate through each moment in reaction rather than coming up with a plan or knowing how to really handle myself in the world. I think I was well into young adulthood before I really got a sense of what nurturing required, and I became a mother at 20 years old. So learning those things, learning how to nurture myself and how to be nurturing to a child who is 36 years old and will argue to this day that she did not receive proper nurturing. And I'm not going to disagree, but I will agree that, like my dad, I did absolutely the best I could with what I had. And from a food standpoint, from an actual nutritional standpoint, we covered her bases. In the end, she has created her own issues around food that are hers to deal with, that probably stem in some ways from some of the places where I didn't know how to nurture or wasn't nurtured in my own life. I grew up in a time period where there were a lot of loose rules around what kids were allowed to do, and I have always said we were very feral children. We spent most of our time outside, and I think when we needed water, we just went to anyone's hose and turned it on and drank water. We went to the bathroom outside. I don't even know that we came in for lunch unless somebody told us there was something to eat. And that wasn't because there wasn't food. That was just because we got busy and active doing what we were doing. And it was also the times. The 70s and early 80s were a strange time period, at least in my neighborhood, for the parents to be living their own lives and nurturing their community efforts. Meanwhile, the kids were kind of fending for themselves in some strange ways. There are several things that go into our nurturing, the neighborhood we grew up in, the family we grew up in, the types of people that we spent our time around when we were young. Each of these groups have their own influence on how we feel connected or disconnected, what degree of ease or dis-ease we feel within each of those groups. So for me as a child, practically zero emotional nurturing, although I definitely felt loved. Spiritual nurturing, I'd say I got quite a bit. Physical nurturing, we were in pretty good shape. And then mental nurturing, I would say I was overstimulated in that area. My dad gave me so many things to think about, so much food for thought, that in many ways balanced out the lack that I had in the areas where I wasn't seeing it. For each of us, we have our own set of raw material that really comes from our earliest mentors, the way that we relate to music or relate to spirit or relate to anything outside of ourselves, and then the way that we feel nurtured, to what degree we feel nurtured in the world. And for every single one of us, that's going to be a different set of criteria that creates our unique human perspective, with our minds working separate from the nature that connects all of us through this tapestry of every bit of our energy. I like to provide a challenge every week. So for this week, sit back and pay attention to the spiritual nurturing that you have received in your life. It's a good time of the year in the winter to just take stock of what your deepest belief system holds and believes and thinks is true about how we're here, why we're here, what matters. Really get into the essence of what you believe about your existence, and spiritually, what has been built within you to hold those beliefs in place. That's a bigger challenge than I usually give, but I think it's a fun one for this winter. It's about to get cold for the weekend, and I think everybody could use a little space to sit back and just wonder how we each specifically created and carved out our own little piece of the world. I will be back next week as we talk about ignorance. Please come back. It is always fun to learn more about how much we really don't know. Have a great week.